Coming to you live from the city of Port Phillip. This is the final 2024 election summary update, so you get to know what's happened with all the results tonight. We're going to talk about the three wards that were declared earlier in the week: Montague ward, Port Melbourne ward, and the cliffhanger that happened down in St Kilda with Serge Taman being re-elected. Then I'll be joined with my co-host, Andrew Bond, former councillor, three-term consecutive councillor, and also Greg Day, who's the managing editor of the Twisk newsletter in St Kilda, and they'll be giving their insights on all the news about what's happening, about who will be representing you as the new mayor and deputy mayor of the city of Port Phillip. But let's get straight into the results as we saw them earlier in the week. We'll start with Montague ward. Now, a quick reminder of the end results of the primary votes in Montague ward. As you can see here, there was a slender margin between the top two primary vote finishers, which was Judy Sahaya Nathan by 20 votes ahead of Alex Macon, and the incumbent councillor came in third, which was Peter Martin, in the end, some distance actually behind the top two leading candidates. There you see the outright vote amounts. Here you see the percentage amounts, but nothing in it at all. But you'd have to say Peter Martin underperformed with only 25% of the primary vote. Peter Martin was sucked into other campaigns in other areas for other candidates such as St Kilda, where he was letterboxing heavily. If he'd spent more of that time in Montague ward, I suspect his primary vote would have been stronger. So let's have a look what happened with preferences in Montague ward and where it went. Keep in mind, Alex Macon was top of the ballot and was a recipient of a sizable donkey vote, as every candidate was in this election. But as you can see, Chris's preferences from PPP moved predominantly more as a higher percentage into Judy. David Knopf went slightly higher to Judy. Then Peter Martin's preferences unexpectedly got distributed. The PPP Progressive Port Phillip ticket held, and Peter Martin's preferences ended up getting Alex Macon elected. And there you can see Judy moves down. So congratulations to Alex Macon, who's been elected to what I think is probably the most important ward in the city of Port Phillip, and that is Montague ward. Let's now move to the probably more simpler grounds in terms of primary result in Port Melbourne, where we saw the incumbent mayor. Sorry, just having a small technical issue there. Just give me one moment while I correct it. So Port Melbourne ward, where we saw the incumbent mayor, who was Heather Consolo, that took a commanding primary vote victory in Port Melbourne. Just before we move on there we can see the primary vote, the two-party preferred vote between Alex Macon and Judy Sahaya Nathan in Montague ward. Fairly close there until the final preferences were distributed, making 52.71% versus Sahaya Nathan at 47.29% of the two-party preferred vote. Let's now move to Port Melbourne ward. Heather Consolo had a commanding lead in the primary vote with 42.39% of the primary vote. It was always going to be difficult to beat her from there, and it was a pretty clear and convincing victory by the time the preference counts went out. So as you can see here, Sablock from PEPP's preferences went over to predominantly Heather. The Labor Party preferences went to the Greens and disproportionately to Heather. And as you can see, Adrian King's vote is increasing there, but not at the same pace as what Heather's was. And once the Greens preferences were distributed, it was a very comfortable victory in the end for Heather Consolo to be re-elected into the ward of Port Melbourne. As you can see here, two-party preferred vote, 65.35% versus 34.65% to Adrian King. So the former mayor, two-term mayor of the last council, gets her second term as a councillor, and that is a very convincing win and a significant mandate. Let's now go to St Kilda, and whilst we do that, let's just make sure we add the stage and welcome the two experts on St Kilda, Greg Day and the former councillor really for St Kilda for the last 12 years, Andrew Bond. Welcome.
Thank you for having us here, Marcus.
What are your thoughts on the primary votes on St Kilda ward?
Look, I'm still surprised at how low Tim got on his primary vote. Had the Victorian Socialist not run, maybe Tim would have been closer to 20, which may have given him an opportunity to win the ward. But she did run, and as we see with the preference distributions, most of her preferences went to Tim, but not all. And I think that was enough to cost him probably a spot in the final two, given he missed out by just 250 votes in the final two in the end. The other interesting thing here, and we saw it in a few of the other wards, the swap between the ALP and the Greens, where one was eliminated before the other. And generally ALP to Greens or Greens to ALP flowed at the rate of about 50 or 60%. What we saw here in St Kilda is just 33% of Robbie's preferences went to the Greens versus 28% followed the how to vote card on Robbie's ticket that went to David Blakely. So more of the vote went to the Greens from Labor voters, but given 60 to 65% went in every other ward and only 33% went here, had Tim gotten that 60 to 65, he may have been able to get over Serge and into second.
And Jenny was top of the ticket, Greg, if I recall. What impact did you think that had in terms of her primary vote?
Well, I think we can only assume that it helped a little bit, but I think there's a women's vote in this part of town, and also an independent to vote, and she worked hard with the posters and the door knocking and stuff like that. So, very credible result.
Well, and there's a clear message in this ward that they want an independent. The top 3 candidates in this ward polled credibly, albeit Jenny was top of the ballot. You would still say there's a fair chunk of that vote, given that you've got a good field of 6 candidates that are very well known in the community in their different ways, and so are their political parties. So that those first 3 gets were not by chance, I would suggest, in this ward. Let's waste no time now and go to the preference distribution. This is probably one of the most fascinating battles, and feel free to jump in here as we go. Victorian Socialist predominantly goes to Baxter, and then Baxter jumps ahead of Robbie at this point, Andrew.
Yeah, look, I think looking at this distribution, there's probably a little bit of karma here for Serge versus what happened to Serge back in 2016, where he got a similar primary vote to myself, not far behind me, but I had a pretty good preference flow, so I got elected. Serge was, as you described, Marcus, a bit of a preference orphan back in 2016. No one was preferencing him, so he ended up finishing 4th behind David Brand, who came from a long way back to defeat Serge and get that final spot on council for Lake Ward. This election, things were very, very different for Serge. He was the one that had the strong preference flows coming from David Blakely, Tim Baxter, and Robbie Nuagai. And that was what got him home over Jenny in the end. I'm inclined to believe that if one of Tim, David, or Robbie had have put Jenny above Serge, that may have been enough to move 90 to 100 votes from Serge to Jenny, which I think would have flipped the results here. So I think he was probably field-dudded by preferences back in 2016, and I think he's had a pretty good preference run here to get him home. So I think the tables have certainly turned from that regards for Serge this election.
Well, and the irony is also that he gets elected here on Green's preferences as it moves through, which is fairly ironic for Serge. Greg,
well, it's a combination of Greens and David Blakely preferences are in that Tim Baxter component. So, and yeah, they flow 60-40 to Serge, and that's what gets him home over Jenny.
But it's also the 3 top votes for people who lived in the area. So Blakely, Roper, and Donman are St Kilda residents.
Yeah, which is the key theme across the whole election. This election's been dominated, obviously, by ROP candidates, independent candidates, and incumbents and political party candidates falling away is the fairly obvious. But I think I'm right in saying that all 9 of the elected candidates live in their wards, which is very different from the last. Well, I'll go through them once we put them up, but this was a sensational result for Jenny Roper and also Serge Taman. Serge is back. I had the privilege of attending some celebration parties this week, and there was interesting commentary, particularly about this ward, but this was probably one of the most fascinating results. Montague was close in the primary vote, but not particularly in the final distribution of preferences. I think there were 47 votes between Peter Martin and Alex Macon, and 15 votes down in Elwood ward that covered the second and third position. But this is probably one of the most interesting wards for me in terms of how the result came out. Just the participants and the personalities that are involved.
Well, the three wards you've named, Marcus, Elwood, Montague, and this one here in St Kilda, the candidate that finished highest on the primary vote didn't actually get elected, and these were the only three wards where that occurred across the entire election.
And then we have it. 48.45% versus 51.55. Serge Taman is elected for his third term, fourth attempt on the City of Port Phillip Council. What can we expect, Greg, from Serge Mark III?
Well, I think we can expect a lot of energy and a lot of ideas that are running here and there. And, I'm sure he's working hard to be mayor.
That's a beautiful segue. Let's now talk about the composition of the councillors. The only one I'm not sure, and I'm pretty sure she does, Libby Buckingham, live in her ward. But here are the 9 councillors on my little political spectrum, as I put it. We got Libby Buckingham and Louise Crawford, who are the endorsed ALP candidates that have been successful. Justin Halliday, I've got in olive green there because I put him in the progressive Port Phillip camp, as I have with Rhonda Small and people through the campaign, because they were much more backed than just the endorsement card that was going around, which benefited people like Alex Macon, etc. Copped a bit of flack for that, but if send the hate mail to hello@marcuspell.com. Happy to receive it. So we got Alex Macon down the middle. I'd be interested to see what Greg and Andrew think about where he swings on the political spectrum and what he actually stands for. Serge Taman, same again in terms of where we think the allegiances will start to lie here, and obviously Heather Consolo, who we know a lot about. Brian Mayers for Lakeside Ward for residents of Port Phillip. Betty J, residents of Port Phillip and South Melbourne Ward, and Rod Hardy with that thumping result there in Albert Park. So, some people are calling this a fairly balanced council, but the ratepayers of Port Phillip here have a commanding position, particularly when it comes to mayoral votes.
I'd just like to start off by saying that the mayoral vote period was the time of year that Marcus actually lived for. Mayoral week was Marcus Pearl's grand final for those watching at home. Marcus would make more calls, send more texts and count more numbers than those that were actually running for mayor and deputy mayor over the weeks leading up to the mayoral vote. And I imagine over dinner tonight, there's lots of close talking happening around that dinner table, lots of promises being made and deals being done as people suss out their chances of getting to that magic number of 5, Marcus, which I think you used to have many paths to 5 in your armory when the mayoral discussions were going on.
Yeah, well, that's the good thing about not always being involved in these elections. But I've been doing the same thing this week and making as many calls to as many people I can to find out what's going on. But just to allude, just some details about what Andrew's talking about there is your 9 elected councillors are at this moment having dinner. They're at an offsite. It's within the city of Port Phillip, but they're meeting, getting to know each other because tomorrow night, potentially tomorrow night, one of these people will be mayor and 1 or 2 of them will be deputy mayor. We're not sure exactly who they'll be, but I'm interested to hear what Greg and Andrew know about what's going on at the moment with the mayor and deputy vote. What are you hearing on the ground?
Well, before we do that, Marcus, given your skills at this, what's the scope of these sort of negotiations that people do?
Well, I think the first ones are often polite, and I'm hearing in the rumour mill at the moment that a number of councillors on your screen here at the moment are suggesting they would like a 2-week hiatus. They want some more time to think about this, and in fact, I know at least 2 councillors have looked up the legal provisions on what would make that happen. My advice to the 9 of them would be to sit down, work it out, and elect somebody. It's not a good start to the game to kick the can down the road. But what that does indicate is there's quite a few horses in the race, which is not unusual for a first-term council. I think people's endorphins are flowing at their highest level, so their enthusiasm is fresh and they're ready to go. But there's probably at least 5 of the 9 councillors here that are putting their hand up either this year or willing to put their hand up for a deal to be in for next year. And those negotiations we know are at play, and the people that are the best beneficiaries for those negotiations are the ratepayers of Port Phillip. They've got the most votes and they've got a voting block, which puts them in a very powerful position.
And
So
you're
the
making
scope-
the presumption that they do vote as a block, Marcus, because I remember my very first mayoral vote. I voted for Surge, which along with the Unchained vote was meant to deliver the mayoralty to Surge. I don't think I'm speaking out of school here. And when those numbers were read out and it was 4-3 to the person I didn't vote for, there were 2 very surprised people in the room, myself and the person who didn't vote for Surge, who everyone thought was going to vote for Surge, and it wound up someone else became mayor. So don't always presume these alliances that get you to the election will stick, because there's a very big instance where from 12 years ago where it didn't.
And tell me, lads, is it a secret ballot?
Well, they can do
Yes.
it the way they want
Yeah.
to do it, but usually how the election process works for a mayor and a deputy mayor is these are very personal occasions, and it is deeply emotional. Andrew and I have been in ballots for mayor and deputy mayor where people have left the room crying and all sorts of type of emotions. And you want those emotions to happen to some degree, but you don't want that to happen in the chamber to somebody. It's not particularly fair. So usually what they try and do is they try and work it out behind the scenes. They run some form of process. Usually there's a speech involved, and then there's a secret ballot done behind the scenes, and then it goes to the chamber. Now, if the vote does go to the chamber, which it occasionally does, so if there's more than one nomination in the chamber, then it's not a secret ballot. You've got to put your hand up. But usually the preference is for people to do this behind the scenes. I understand that the City of Port Phillip has arranged a facilitator for this first time, just given the large number of new councillors that they have to deal with. So that option is available to councillors also, but they'll meet behind the scenes tomorrow to try and work it out. But there are some councillors trying to delay the vote for another 2 weeks, perhaps to position themselves more better. But I do know that there's at least 5 that want to throw their hat in the ring either this year or next year.
And do people really do this? I'll have it this year, you can have it next year thing?
Absolutely, they do, Greg. And most of the time that deal sticks. There was one famous instance where it didn't stick, Marcus. The first 2 years stuck and the 3rd year didn't. And there were lots of tears and lots of upset people as a result of that. But that's politics. You take your chances, and if it sticks, it sticks. But yeah, you always want to be the one that goes first, so that if it doesn't stick, well, you've had your turn, and if the agreement breaks, as it occasionally happens, you're not disadvantaged by the breaking of the agreement, which I've seen happen over the last 12 years also.
So, and what happens with Heather Consolo, Andrew? Do you think she'll put her hand up?
I think the last 6 weeks has been very tough on Heather. I don't think I'm speaking out of school here. You only got to listen to her commentary or read her commentary on Facebook and listen to her interview with yourself, Marcus. I think Heather needs to spend some time with her family. I'm sure she would love to have another go at mayor again, but I don't think this year she will put her hand up because, as I said, it's been a very bruising last 8 weeks for Heather, and she probably needs a bit of time to get herself back into gear and get herself motivated again, and then she'll come back and be an even better mayor than she was for the last 2 years.
Greg, what are you hearing about Louise Crawford?
Well, look, to be honest, I haven't heard much. I think they're being a bit stum to people I know. So it is very personal. There's a whole algorithm that people have to go through to decide how much they fight for this. So I'm sorry, I don't have any intel that will really outclass you guys because you know how it works.
Look, I think Louise will put her hand up. She's done it before. She's been a very good mare, very experienced. And looking at the screen in front of us, Marcus, I think Louise would walk in with 3 votes, and I think Rod, if he was to put his hand up, would walk in with 3 votes. Whoever else on the screen, where they're able to get 3 votes on to stay in the race, who knows? And I think that's got to be your starting point. Is Louise will have 3, Rod will probably have 3. Whether Serge or Alex or Heather are able to get to 3, as I said, I don't think Heather will put her hand up. But if Alex or Serge put their hand up, will one of them be able to get to 3 or perhaps more to make it through to the final 2 or final last person standing? Remains to be seen.
Well, I'm certainly hearing that Serge is eager to do it. And I'm hearing.
I'm not surprised to hear that, Marcus.
No, well, it's a long-held ambition, and you should never question someone's ambition. But he's had a go before, and I think it's safe to assume he'd be doing the same again. And he can say he represents a fresh approach now, 8 years on the bench, and also a combination of a bit of experience. We also know Alex is very ambitious, and I'm also hearing that he's putting his hat in the ring, not necessarily for this year, but obviously touting that he does want to see a future. But don't be surprised if he walks out tomorrow in a leadership position either. Greg, go ahead.
Well, there's lots of. It's really a council of 3s, isn't it? We've got 3 former councillors. We've got 3 progressives, 3 ratepayers, 3 in the middle.
Well, let's talk about the middle. How do you think the middle swings in terms of these individual councillors?
Well, we know what Heather's about. She likes to be fair and try and be balanced. We know that Serge is on about the idea. He's on about, he's an ideas man. He likes to think that, he's got ideas, get things going, and many of his ideas are terrific. I don't know much about Alex, except that he's a marketing person. He's obviously ambitious because he's been a mayor before. He knows what he's in for. So that middle rank there are going to be hot to trot.
Just quick correction there, Greg. There's 4 former councillors there.
Oh, who's the 4th?
Crawford, Taman, Consolo, and Hardy.
And Macon.
Macon, there's 5.
I
used to about the 3, right, with experience.
No, I meant former Port Phillip councillors.
Yeah, got it. Sorry, pardon me.
But there are 5 former councillors, yeah.
Yes. We haven't spoken much about the ratepayer block, but it's arguable that they will have they're in the best position to be able to control these votes, and they would be well organised. Well, I know they're well organised. They're in already negotiations with a number of people about this, and they would be well advised to make sure that incorporated into the negotiations, they make sure they get their council plan asks in place. Because really, the first term is when you can make the biggest difference. If you want to make a difference to council, your budget item, your budget reduction, your budget increase, your project must be in the council plan to make a real difference through the council processes.
Well, that would be my other question too. Not only is it who will be mayor, but what's the scope of the changes that an incoming council can make?
How badly do you want to be mayor?
Sorry?
How badly do you want to be mayor? If you want the mayor badly enough, you'll probably agree to pretty much anything.
Well, I don't know whether the way I think about it is I would, the ratepayers people would like to have the history record show that this was where they made an advance, and they would like to have that be symbolised with a mayor, very much like Marcus wanted to be advance his ideas by being a mayor in his term. So there's a lot of pressure on them.
Well, it's about what they value more, Greg. Do they value something like a rate freeze more than they would value being mayor? Because they're probably the two trade-offs that would be on the table for the ratepayers here. They've put their whole existence on the ability to deliver a rate freeze, and if they're able to convince someone who puts their hand up for mayor that this is what's important to us, and there's 3 votes here for you for mayor if you agree to giving us what we want, and that's the negotiation that would have been taking place over the last few days amongst many people about what do you do with your ambition and what do you do with your policy ambition, and where the two conflict and where the two align with other candidates.
Don't we wish we were flies on the wall?
We sure do, and I'm sure it's very cordial and polite there today. And if you've got any gossip, particularly Andrew, about what happened there today, I'd be interested to hear that. But they'll be being very polite with each other. They'll be cognizant that I think the ratepayers will be cognizant that they have to perform in this term. They've got a mandate. They've performed very well. They've got a substantial number of seats now on council. There's no excuses, and they'll want to perform. And that's admirable for them. So they've got to.
They don't have to make that switch from being critics to leaders.
Well, they're now in control, right? And I think the underlying sentiment that the ratepayers have done very well on in the past 4 years, or the residents of Port Phillip have done in the past 4 years, is that council's wrong, council's toxic, council's terrible. And that's aligned quite well with the underlying sentiment in the average person on the street. And I think the biggest mistake the Labor Party and the Greens made in this election is they reinforced it with the same comments saying council's dysfunctional, council's not working. And I think most people said, well, I'm not going to give you my vote, I'll give it to the residents of Port Phillip. So they're in a commanding position. They've got a group of 3 councillors that I think are pretty sensible and reasonably businesslike, and they're organised, so they'll know how to function well, I think. Now they need to turn that into results, but they can only do that with the support of two of the other 6, where these mayor votes come into it. On the ALP Halliday side, the ALP and the Greens, in my experience, thinks anything's dysfunctional unless they have a majority. They don't have a majority in this situation. They're used to caucusing votes rather than canvassing for votes, I would suggest. And they're not always great at compromise. I don't think Justin is in that boat. But certainly, to get things done on this council, they're going to have to, work their way through a situation which perhaps won't come naturally to them. But if they handle it well and they do it in a united way, which, that's what Progressive Port Phillip's been training all their candidates to do through all these months, is, not undermine each other, work as a team. They've held, functions where they've had experienced councillors put that message out, then they might be able to put themselves in a better position. But where these 3 in the middle go really comes down to what happens with the culture, what happens with the issues, and what happens with the budget position.
And then once we find out who's the mayor Thursday night, Marcus, if it does go ahead, I guess the next question is what happens with how everyone performs on council. Do some people who obviously don't get to be mayor become adversarial to the rest of council? Do they become like the opposition? And we've seen that on many councils over the last few years, and you and I may have played that role at some point in time. When we were in a minority on council, we may have been viewed as the opposition to the other councillors who were the government type situation, and whether something like that occurs here, where a councillor or group of councillors who don't feel part of the main group become that opposition, and be the ones that publicly disagree with the direction of council, and exactly which councillors those are is still up for grabs also.
So we're willing to make any predictions of who walks out tomorrow night with the coveted chains and robe and the office, I think it's $121,000 salary or thereabouts. I was meant to look this up before the show today, but it's not a small amount of money. You get 120 grand, you get an executive assistant, and you get a car. What does the deputy mayor get paid these days, Andrew?
I think it was about 65,000, no assistant and no car.
So 65 grand, and I think the council is just below 40 or
Yeah, I
about
think it's
$40,000.
somewhere between 35 and 40. Works
So
out to about $8 an hour, Marcus. I worked it out, my hourly rate as a councillor once.
It's well over $1 million. These 9 people will be costing us in the next 4 years. So let's hope we get our value for money. But who's willing to make a prediction here about, if you want to do an each way bet on a couple of people, go for it. But who you think is going to walk out as mayor, or who would you like to see as mayor? Greg, you start us off. You're so good at predictions.
Oh, I'm not in the prediction business. Look, I think it's fascinating. I'd rather wait and see and then talk about it later. I'm sorry. That's
Andrew.
I'll get off the fence. Look, I think we may see Mayor to Man tomorrow night. I think if the rate players play their hand right and do a deal with Serge and Alex, I think they can get the numbers for Serge to be mayor, and they make large advances into their policy agenda that they would like to see on council in return for Serge being mayor. That's the most obvious outcome I can see here, but there are 2 or 3 other possibilities. Maybe one of the ratepayers want to be mayor themselves. I think Louise will probably put her hand up. Maybe she's able to convince a couple of people. We still don't really know where Alex sits politically. I know Serge, having been on council with him, he probably leans a little bit to the left, but I don't know where Alex leans. I know he did get the endorsement from PPP, but I also thought he leaned our way, Marcus, at times. So I'm not really sure.
Yes, we thought he was a member of our way, but that's not the way it turned out.
Yeah, it turns out it's not the case. So we don't really know where he aligns politically. Maybe he's naturally left. Maybe he's naturally right. Maybe he could lean either way depending on what's in it for him. Maybe he's the master negotiator here that ties it all together and puts something together to benefit him. But yeah,
all the information I'm getting is he's the one that's talking to everybody, and there is value in that, and there's a role to be played on a council for somebody that does that. Because a lot of people want to run and they don't make any phone calls to make their dreams come true. Whereas the person that's out there talking to everybody all the time, there's information's a powerful thing in these games.
And once you know what everyone else wants, you can try and satisfy the needs and put something together, which is a role you used to play on council, Marcus.
Or at least the people feel listened to. Greg?
Yes.
And guys, you'll also have people doing a mayor, deputy mayor package. So there's lots of different ways you could slice and dice that.
Yeah, and there maybe multi-year packages being put together here. I do know of one previous group of councillors who put together a 3-year deal down at the St Kilda Bowls Club one sunny Sunday afternoon, and that deal mostly stuck for the remainder of the 3 years we were on council, Marcus.
Yes. So we'll see what happens. Again, what's happening at the moment is you've got the 9 councillors invited to attend sessions over the next 3 days. The 9 of them should have been locked up today. I'm not exactly sure what the attendance score was about who attended today, but all 9 were invited to start working through the governance arrangements and the handover arrangements. It's a good balance in this council. I think there's a good lift in talent in this group. There's a good diversity in terms of age, geography. I think this has the ingredients to be a reasonable council, but their first test is tomorrow night and their second test is the council plan. So it'll be interesting to see who comes out as mayor. I agree with Andrew. I think if Serge plays his cards right, this is his best chance, I think, of getting the car and getting the office and getting the robes and getting the change, which is the coveted thing that he wants. He desperately wants the leadership position shifted down to St Kilda. He's got the experience. He's a bit older and wiser now. I think he knows how to relate to people to get these votes done. So, perhaps it's a bit of a soft spot, but I wouldn't be surprised if he walks out, but who knows? Brian Mears could put his hand up if Rod Hardy doesn't want to do it, or Macon might do a deal also. But let's wait and see what happens tomorrow. But it's an all-important vote tomorrow, so they'll be in the room tomorrow daytime. It's broadcast live on the council's Facebook page at 6:30 tomorrow night, or you're welcome to pop down to St Kilda Town Hall. It's quite an enjoyable session to watch. The councillors that have been elected get inaugurated. They make some opening remarks and speeches to thank people. Their family usually attends. There's usually a bit of a cocktail party afterwards and some free food. So if you want some free canapes, pop down to St Kilda Town Hall tomorrow night would be my advice. Any final?
Do you know where they're dining tonight, Marcus?
I don't know where they're dining tonight. I did invite Brian Mears on the show tonight, and he did his absolute best to come on and talk to us. So I was hoping to get some inside scoop. He's the only one of the 9 that I think that hasn't been on. Yep. So Brian's agreed to come on at a future date, but it's a happy wedding anniversary, Brian, and he's also been at this all-important dinner where they're getting to know each other. But I don't know where it is. I presume it's in the city of Port Phillip. So if you're online now and you're sitting in the pub and you can see them, please feel free to send us a message. So
my phone just beeped, Marcus.
Oh, there you go. I hope you enjoyed this casual meander through the final 3 ward results of the City of Port Phillip election. We've enjoyed putting this series together. It's had over 10,000 views. Our objective the whole time is to take our bias and try and put it in the shelf as much as we possibly could to give you information and some perspectives to help you with your vote. And also get to know and get more comfortable with the election process. The thing that comes up the most when we talk to people through a council election is I don't know the candidates, I don't know what's going on, and I don't have access to any information. We've tried to close that gap. I hope we've partially succeeded in doing that, and I've enjoyed putting this together. I hope you've enjoyed watching them. Greg and Andrew and I will talk in the next week about what we do going forward. We will do something going forward, but we've really enjoyed doing this. We thank you for all your comments, all your hate mail, and please feel free to come through. Greg or Andrew, any final thoughts you'd like to give to our audience tonight?
No, just thanking you for putting this together. It's been fun.
Well, you boys do love a gossip.
We were never one of your sources over the last 8 years, Greg.
No, never once. Yeah.
Good night to you guys, and good night to everybody. Thank you for joining.